Again, welcome everybody. My name is Charlene Margot, and I'm co-founder of nonprofit The Parent Venture. We are delighted to have with us tonight Lara Love Hardin, author of the new book, The Many Lives of Mama Love. Welcome, Lara. We're so glad to have you with us tonight. So we have lots of questions, but let's start off easy, okay? I love the title of your book. Can you tell us more about why you chose it and about some of the many lives that you have led?
Wonderful. Well, thank you for having me, and hello to everyone I can't see. And thank you to the interpreter. I appreciate it, the talk being interpreted or translated. So funnily enough, the title of my book was not the actual title it sold as. There was a different title. And it got changed in the process. But The Many Lives of Mama Love, and it is a memoir of lying, stealing, writing, and healing is the subtitle. And Mama Love is both who I am. I'm the mother to 4 boys and 2 stepchildren. It was also my jail nickname that I was given while I was an incarcerated woman. And, you know, many lives, we can talk about that, but some of the many lives I have had have been, you know, daughter, student, teacher, mother, wife, ex-wife, real estate agent, pet cemetery owner, writer, addict, convict, felon, justice impacted woman, literary agent, CEO. They're all so many lives. But I will tell you, the original title that it sold on from the proposal to Simon & Schuster was called The Neighbor from Hell and Other People I Have Been. And that was the original title, and it got changed in the writing process.
Oh, you described that neighbor from hell headline in your TED Talk, and it just is so powerful. I mean, I live in a community like that, Lara. We don't get a lot of people who end up in jail here either, but I can imagine that that was just an unbelievable thing.
Yeah, and for those of you who haven't read the book, at the time that I was sentenced, the next day, my face was on the front page of the local paper, the Santa Cruz Sentinel, with that headline, The Neighbor from Hell. And it was humiliating for me, but also for my children. You know, I had 2 boys in high school, 1 in junior high. One was, you know, Caden, my youngest was only 4, you know, and your parents are embarrassing enough when you're in high school, but when your mom's on the front page of the paper, it was horrifying for a lot of reasons. You know, my son Ty, who's in junior high at the time, he said that every single classroom he went in that day, that paper was on the teacher's desk. And so, you know, I don't think public humiliation ever lends to rehabilitation, but you know, I carried that article, that headline. It was really a big source of shame for me. When I was incarcerated, someone anonymously mailed to me all of the online comments to that, because otherwise I would never have seen them. And I read them over and over and over again, really, you know, hurtful, horrible things and some untrue things. And I read them over and over, and I carried those comments with me, like, you know, literally for years, but figuratively for over a decade, because they were such a source of shame for me for so long.
Wow, I can't imagine, because of course you didn't have a cell phone. You would only be getting what you saw in the mail, right? If something was sent to you.
Yeah, there's no cell phones or computers.
The neighbor from hell, huh?
Yeah.
Wow. So, you know, Laura, there's so many themes in this book that we're going to talk about tonight. But when I read it, as a parent and the founder of a parent education program, what really struck me was motherhood and how your commitment to your children is what really saved you. At least it felt like to me. Do you see it that way? And for those of you who are new and don't know her story at all, Laura, maybe you could like give us sort of the mini description of what happened to you.
I mean, the story is really the story of me, like 48 million other people in this country right now, struggling with substance use disorder. I became addicted to prescription pain medication that I was prescribed, you know, every childbirth. And I became addicted, and that addiction, for whatever combination of genetics and environment and nature and nurture within me turned into, you know, I became addicted to them, and that addiction progressed over time and turned into a heroin addiction for 11 months until I was arrested. And my youngest was taken away by Child Protective Services at the time of my arrest. And I served a year in the Santa Cruz County Jail. And when I got out, I was jobless, homeless, friendless, childless, carless, and really had to rebuild my life. And, you know, I get asked how I did it because it was really hard. I have no idea how I did it, but I know why I did it. And that was because of my children and this fundamental belief, you know, disbelief in me that there was any entity that could tell me I was no longer going to be my children's mother.
I think that was the part that when I was reading it and when I was watching you say it, that whoever was the officer when he came to your house and said to you, you're never going to be his mother again. And I thought that must be the cruelest thing anybody's ever said to anyone.
He said, you should not be anyone's mother.
Oh, you should not be anyone's
and
mother.
you will never see your child again.
It gives me chills, Lara.
I mean, it really led to really a couple of nights later, the darkest moment of my life. And I think, you know, my children saved me, but there's a part of being a mother that actually made it so I needed to be saved later. And that was because I remember thinking to myself, there's no way I can tell anyone I have a problem. This is before my arrest, you know, because no one, you know, growing up, I didn't write, Dear Diary, I hope someday I can be addicted, or I hope someday I can go to jail. You know, that was not, my only goal was creating a family like I didn't have growing up, you know, this like beautiful, perfect family. And I was going to be the perfect mom. And so the problem with trying to be the perfect mom for me was that I couldn't admit when I wasn't, and I couldn't admit that I needed help. And I remember saying, like, I can't tell anyone I need help because how on earth could I ever be 30 days away from my children by going to rehab? You know, and then
Oh, okay. That's what
happened, right? And so looking back, I was like, oh, if only I could have asked for help, if only I was brave enough to do that. And I wasn't.
Well, and you kept thinking that tomorrow would be the day, and tomorrow would be.
I'll fix it. I'll figure it out. I'll fix it, as my life was spiraling out of control.
Yeah. Well, so it's been a few years since 2008. Lara, why is it that you decided that now is the time to write this story? I mean, what is it? And was it hard to shift from doing the kind of collaborative writing that you have done so successfully to writing about yourself?
Well, you know, reading and writing, you know, the first line of my book is reading was my first addiction. You know, I've always loved to read. It was my escape from a hard childhood. Writing is, you know, a natural, you know, reading is the gateway drug to writing, I always say, you know, and it was what I was good at. It's what I got attention for as a kid. I loved writing stories. I loved being in my imagination. So I always wanted to write a book. That's what I, you know, went to college for in graduate school. I didn't think it would be this book necessarily in this story. But, you know, really for 11 years, up until 2019, which is not that long ago, I was in so much shame, and I was keeping that headline a secret. I lived in fear of anybody Googling me, right? And seeing that headline. And so I gave a TEDx talk at the end of 2019, and I got on a stage here in Santa Cruz, and I said the thing that I was so afraid everyone would have found out about me. And the feeling I got after doing that, there was a lightness to me. It was better than any drug I've ever taken, right? It was just so much freedom. And I found that I had a lot to say, not about my story. You know, I'm one of millions of stories, but it was really a lot to say about shame and judgment and how much community heals us and isolation, you know, makes that shame multiply. And so it was after that I decided to do the book. And really, I only did it because, well, I did it for two reasons. One, it's a crazy story, right? And I'm a literary agent, so I know it's a crazy story, which is what you look for as you know, when you're selling books to publishers. But also I thought it would do some help. And I really believe, you know, my goal was to make sure that no justice impacted mother, and 80% of the women that are incarcerated in the 3,116 jails are mothers of minor children. So to make sure that to do what I could. I can't make sure, but to do what I could to make sure that they didn't waste 11 years in shame, because when you're in shame, you don't advocate for yourself. There's no creativity, there's no vision. Um, and also, so maybe it wouldn't be so hard for the women who come after me to rebuild their lives. And
So
it's hard for a number of different reasons.
So you carried that burden after you got out of jail all the way. You kept carrying that burden.
I kept carrying that burden. Yeah, carrying that burden. Yeah, shame is sticky and it stayed with me for so long. Even, I was working on these amazing books with amazing people.
Yeah.
And, I was working with Archbishop Desmond Tutu and the Dalai Lama and Brian Stevenson and none of these, and, Stanford professors and neuroscientists and amazing non-judgy people, right?
Maybe the most non-judgy people in the world.
Yeah, like exactly. And so I was really in this desperate race to prove to myself that I was more good than bad. And I did that somewhat by being good adjacent, right? Like, because I knew the truth would come out. Truth always comes out. And so the way I saw it was like two trains. Here's me doing all the good work in the world, and here's my past. And eventually they're going to collide. And when I have to defend myself, I wanted my resume of goodness, and a lot of that, I didn't know it at the time. Looking back, it's always easy to see that. I just knew that I wanted to feel valuable again and do good work in the world. And I was really comfortable kind of hiding in the acknowledgments of the books I was working on for a long time.
I would think it would be really easy to hide in the acknowledgement of those amazing books with those amazing people.
Yes. And I knew I was adding a lot of value to the world, and that felt good to me. I needed to do that.
Amazing. My claim to fame is the Dalai Lama and I have the same birthday. Does that count?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. So I want to go back to a minute to what you just said, which is literally the opening line of your book is, reading was my first addiction, and the books were an escape for you from your troubled childhood. We don't typically think of reading as an addiction, but can you describe how that worked for you as a child? I mean, I kind of felt the same way growing up, and I still do. I've always been a reader and a writer, but where does reading as an addiction fit for you now as a literary agent? Do you use that kind of tongue in cheek, or do you mean it?
I mean, I would say it was my first addiction in the terms of, escape, in terms of like escaping yourself, escaping circumstances, which a lot of times addiction is. And also, I think addiction is a symptom. Even if it's reading addiction, it's a symptom of there's something else wrong and going on. And, I grew up, my family was chaotic and violent. There was a lot of alcoholism and addiction in it, but nobody talked about it, right? And there was also a lot of silence. And as a young child, I was like confused and I was very much alone. And so books they gave me the same thing that I was looking for when with my opiate addiction, which is a way to feel connected to the world, which sounds crazy because it's very isolating and does the opposite eventually. But it was this way to feel connected, to feel love, and I found that in the pages of books and certainly in writing. And writing became how I made sense of the world. As like very young, I have a lot of really bad poetry when I was younger and bad stories, but I was writing from a really young age. But in all practicality, when the chaos was going on in my house, I would hide in my closet and I would read. So that in that way, it was this sort of desperate clinging to something to take me away from my circumstances or myself or how I was feeling inside.
Okay, that makes sense.
And it's amazing how many book club women across the country relate to that, reading as an addiction. No, it's not an addiction where you're gonna, implode your life necessarily, or, certainly, you're not gonna go you might steal your friend's book, but in general, it's a healthy addiction.
No, I really hear you. I feel like that too. I'm just completely lost if I don't have something that I love that I'm reading. And I do keep a log of everything I read, and it just is really satisfying. But I hear you about, especially during childhood, you need something like that to take you away, right? But I'm sure it made you a better writer.
Yeah, definitely. That is a great way to learn writing, is reading.
Well, and Lara, I think about your story and your community because we do a lot of education around substance use. And it is often very silent and very private and very shameful. Or, around here, people get their kids have surgery for an athletic injury, and then they end up as opiate addicts or heroin addicts. We work with a woman who I love, who's become a friend. She wrote a book called Saving Jake about her son. And she would stand up in front of a group of parents and say, I don't look like the mother of a heroin addict, but I am. Nobody brings you a casserole when addiction hits home. I mean,
Yeah.
can you comment on how that sort of, even today, as much as we're trying to reduce stigma, it's still really there, don't you think, for many people?
Yeah, it's definitely still there. And I think, the stakes are a lot higher now, like the consequences are a lot higher now than they were 15 years ago, for me, 16 years ago, when I was in my addiction, because there wasn't fentanyl then, right? There wasn't Snapchat pill ordering, there wasn't all of those things. And I think, there is a lot of shame about it, about struggling with what I believe is a mental health issue, addiction. And it's hard for parents too, because really we are like, it's going to reflect on us, like I don't, no one wants to look like the parent of X, Y, or Z that's not perfectly, getting into Stanford, honestly. And that doesn't help anyone. And I think, I was at the Nantucket Book Festival, which is a beautiful place, very, socioeconomically high level of residents there. And I gave a book talk. And after the event, at this sort of dinner after, people individually in this very small community would come up and whisper in my ear and say, we have a big problem here, but no one's talking about it. And it was these people who were friends, and they're all whispering to me. And, people die in silence, and so I encouraged, I might have, brought it out into the open in the group, because, it is a matter of life or death, and we can't afford to pretend it's not there. If there's 48 million people age 12 and over struggling, there's another at least 2 or 3 that love them. And so this, you can't go anywhere without finding someone whose life isn't affected by it, whether it's themselves directly or someone they love. And by not talking about it, we're doing a disservice to everyone.
Absolutely. Absolutely, Laura. I think that, here in Menlo Park, it turns out, we're at the foot of Silicon Valley, Page Mill Road, you hear about. And the AA group in our town is one of the biggest in California.
Mhm.
I mean, it's not an accident, right?
Right.
But it still is shameful. For example, we brought several times Dr. Anna Lemke from Stanford, who's a psychiatrist who wrote a book called Dopamine Nation. And she really is one of the people that rang the bell about physicians overprescribing, and then what opioids do to the brain. It's like, right, they hijack you, and you come to see it as a substance that you can't live without.
Yeah, it does. It gets to where it feels like a matter of survival. Like you will die if you don't.
Right. So you can't. So then how do you make your decisions about what you're going to do? You have to do that first, right?
Yes.
So have you brought up your kids with discussions, I'm assuming, about substances and heredity and all that stuff? We try to teach that to parents, that even if they don't suffer from it, nobody doesn't have somebody on the family tree who does.
Right. Yeah. And we talked about that long before, I had 2 boys in high school when I was arrested. So long before that, we talked about it. And, I always explained it to them. And again, this is, listen to the Stanford doctor, but the way I would explain it to them is like, here's you and here's your friend. And, everybody has their levels. You don't know of like what anything recreational will tip you over the edge, right?
Yeah.
And it's a combination of brain chemistry and environment and nature and nurture and all of those things. And, luckily none of my boys have struggled in that way. And I don't know if it's, because of luck or because of what they saw me go through. I do know, this sounds a little crazy, but I do know that my experience, like going to jail, made me a better mother, in that it made me a more real mother with my children.
A more real mother.
It made me a more real mother, because there was nothing that my boys ever felt like they couldn't talk to me about because of what I went through over these last 16 years.
Oh, on any subject.
Any subject. And so, and this is through, elementary school and junior high and high school and college and beyond. There's nothing And so, I'm sorry that my way of learning things the hard way is, became their college essay topics, because no parent wants to be the subject of that. But
yeah, but
that was a gift, because there was no pretense with us. There was no like, I'm the mother, listen to me. There wasn't, we just got real. That's the best way I can describe it. And we continue to stay real.
it's really important to think about, Lara, because people like David Sheff, who we have hosted, who wrote Beautiful Boy. He's such an amazing man. But what he says is the reason why teenagers take substances is because they work. We've created this pressure cooker for kids. And for some reason, we adults think that they should just be able to handle it without anything. It ain't that easy.
Right. Absolutely.
So what you're saying really makes sense. And parents, I would listen to that, because we have to have these conversations. Parents come to us all the time and they're like, my teenagers don't listen to me. And I will say, that's because you really need to start when they're 4. If you don't build that trust and communication when they're little, you're not going to have it when they're teenagers.
Yeah. I think, and I think the best thing we can do as parents is kind of heal our own trauma, right? Work on ourselves and one of the things that kept me in shame for so long is because I really believe that if people saw the real me, if I was vulnerable, it would, send people running away. And really it does the opposite. It brings them, it brought people running to me, and people felt safe to share all of their secrets with me. I've been the keeper of, since my book came out, everyone DMs me their secrets, right? And yeah, I
had that happen when I was getting divorced. Like, all these people started telling me their stories, and I thought, I didn't really sign up for this.
And so we know that works adult to adult, but it works with your children too. Like if you go to your, I've gone to my, to my youngest and been like, I don't know what to do. What do you think I should do about this with you? Like just like admit if you're struggling or you don't know, or just listen, and I think, I used to go right to let me fix the problem with you. Let me fix, rather than now I listen. Which, maybe everybody else knows this. I never learned this, and I never experienced this growing up. I grew up in a family where there was no language for emotion. No one said, how was your day? No one said, how are you feeling? And so I had to learn all of that as an adult. I had to learn this emotional language. And, I learned it pretty late in life. So I guess, I let that be my cautionary tale to people. It's just to like get real and don't pretend to your children that you have it all figured out either, because that just puts more pressure on them. There's a lot of relief in knowing like, oh, you know what? Dad doesn't know what he's doing on some days. Mom doesn't know what she's doing. It's okay that I don't know what I'm doing. And, and I would say nobody knows what they're doing really in the world.
Isn't that the truth, Laura?
Nobody knows anything. So let's figure it out together. That's kind of
the older we get, I always say the older we get, the less we know. I grew up in a house where my mother died of breast cancer when I was 18.
Sorry.
Nobody said she had cancer. Nobody talked about it. Nobody told us. And it just happened. And I just made sure when I was raising my own kids that we didn't act like that.
Yeah.
And some of our hardest times, I think, are also really important. And they say they would do it all again. So I guess the kids give us some grace, right?
Yeah, they do.
All right, Laura, I have to just ask this. I know is probably the hardest point or the lowest point, but tell us more about that moment when you actually had just gotten to jail and thought about taking your own life, and what happened instead.
Yeah. It was really, we talked right at the beginning about the deputy who said to me, you should not be anyone's mother and you will never see your child again. And at that moment, was really, I believed him. That's all I can say. And I didn't know where my youngest had been taken, and they wouldn't tell me. And I was, I know they had, Child Protective Services had taken him away, but in my mind, he was not safe if he wasn't with me. He'd never spent a night away from me. And I was terrified and imagining all these horrible things. And I really, it was the lowest point. It was a couple nights later. And I really, the way I could describe it, it was just very dark, but very calm. And it was just this emptiness. And I thought, I have just failed at life. Like I've just failed. Like I gave it a try. but
Mhm.
there's no coming back from this. There's no redemption arc for me. And also I don't deserve one. That's really what was going on. And I didn't know what the future was. I didn't know if I would never see my children again until they were in their 40s. Like I didn't know what was going to happen. And I really believed, and it's a horrible belief I had. And I was also detoxing from opiates, but I believed my children would be better off to have a dead mother than a mother in prison. Like I really believed that. And I decided to end my life. And I wrote them a note. And in the audiobook, this was the hardest part to read. My voice really cracked reading this. And they left it in. I thought they'd make me re-record, but I said, I told them I loved them and that I was sorry and that I hoped addiction never got a hold of them, and it was really such a dark, dark moment. And, I tied a sheet around my neck and like 6 strong knots, and I was in jail and it was loud and the guards come in every hour. And when you're detoxing from opiates, you don't sleep, for a month. And I was just lying there waiting for everyone to fall asleep so I could end my life because there was no vision of any future that seemed possible for me. Certainly not that bio you read, right?
Yeah.
And so I was waiting between, for it to go quiet and for the guards to do their check. And I was ready. I was ready for it to be over. And then the next thing I know, it's the sound of these plastic chairs scraping. And I was just in Flint, Michigan yesterday at the jail there, talking to all of the women in jail there yesterday. And but that sound of chairs scraping, I heard it yesterday and it woke me up, and I had fallen asleep and I'd slept through the night and I'd slept through the guard checks. And I remember the lights going on and I was, like, it's like waking up from a surgery, right? Where you're like,
Yeah.
how did time pass? It felt like that. And not once did I think, ooh, I should ask someone for help because I'm sitting here in the light with, I'm hiding under the sheet trying to get the knots undone so no one knows, because I was like ashamed of, that anyone would know that I was going to kill myself, like it was just like craziness. And, looking back now, it feels miraculous to me that I fell asleep because I never slept through the night again for another month. But I got pulled that morning into court and I found out a little bit about Caden. And then I was never in that dark place. I knew that he was going to go to my ex-husband and be with his brothers and that they were going through that process. And honestly, if the deputy had just told me he's okay, I promise you he'll be okay. I
Yeah.
might not have gotten, it's my choices, but I'm just like, there's just something in that shaming that doesn't help, and can really hurt. And I luckily was never in that dark a place. Things weren't all sunshine and roses starting the next day, but I was luckily never in that dark a place again.
Wow. That's quite a story, Laura. So tell us, on a brighter note, how did you get your nickname?
Well, I mean, I was a mom without her children when I was in jail, and I have a lot of mother energy. I always have. And, my oldest son was a senior in high school when I was arrested. He was 17. My best friend in jail was 19. So I felt, very motherly, though I was, a lot older than the girls in there, and they were girls. They were young, and they each had a story, and they had a lot of, 100% of women who are incarcerated have histories of trauma, like very serious trauma from childhood and domestic violence and all kinds of things. And so I just wanted to keep the peace in there. So I used my mother skills and my PTA skills and my being a mother of 4 boys skills. But I really, the women in jail really saved me and gave me community. And I started writing again in jail, and I started ghostwriting. I became a ghostwriter in jail. I started writing letters for the other women, hearing their stories and writing letters to the judges as them, asking for treatment instead of prison or a pass for graduation or a funeral. I broke up with some people for them. I just started writing again, and it felt good. I was adding, I felt like I was valuable, and I rediscovered my love for writing because when I had 3 children, 4.5 years, and getting a job as a writer didn't seem practical to pay the bills, so I really let that go. And for me, addiction and writing can never coexist at the same time because they do the same thing. Writing was always how I made sense of the world and processed my feelings and all of that growing up. And when I stopped doing that as a young mom, in all of the stresses, that's really, I like to say I was a late bloomer to addiction and an overachiever, right? So, it's all of those things. So I was given that nickname by the women I was in jail with. Everyone gets a nickname, and that was my nickname because, and it's I have people all over calling me that, but it is just it's a certain energy.
Okay. You never know when those PTA skills are going to come in
I
handy.
know, those conflict resolution. Yeah.
Right. They really do come in handy. So I want to talk for a little bit about, you have said that in some ways jail was a very positive experience, one of the best experiences of your life. So tell us more about what you mean by that.
What I mean by that is it gave me the gift of becoming real, becoming me. And it did this, again, there's easier, gentler ways to do this. But for me, everything I had constructed around my life was gone. Every identity I had was gone in jail. I was not a mother in jail. I was not a wife. I was not a boss or an employee. I wasn't a community member. I didn't coach Little League. I wasn't on the school board. Like all of those things were gone. And I didn't have a name. I had a number. And the gift of that was that I could become me, without all of those things I constructed to show the world who I am in my cul-de-sac, in my minivan, in my this or that. And so that was a gift because I don't know if I would become real if that hadn't have happened. I also learned to meditate in jail, which is a great place. Again, there's, take a course, don't do that. But I really learned to quiet my own mind. And I got that from a book. The first book I read in jail was The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle. And
Well, if you're going to read one book, that's the one.
That's the one. And I read it over and over again. And there was one sentence in there about how to stop your thoughts. And I grabbed onto that. And it was so simple. And it gave me just a speck of peace because I was spending my sleepless nights and my days trying to rewrite my own past, like if only I'd gone left, if only I'd asked for help, why didn't I do this? Why did I do this? Just sort of ruminating and spiraling or worrying about the future, which was completely unknown to me and terrifying. Am I going to go to prison for 20 years? Am I never going to see my children? Will I ever, X, Y, or Z? And so I learned to quiet my mind, which was a gift, a big gift. And through the process, the painful process, jail is not great. It's not great. I told the funny scenes in a few scenes, but I still have nightmares about having to go back. So I don't want to like misportray it either. But there was a gift in becoming real and figuring out who I was separate from all of the roles I had assumed in my life. And I like who I am. And I'm more me than I've ever been me. And, do I wish I didn't have to, cause collateral damage to do that? I do, but I do see it as a gift because it helped me. One, it stopped me from self-destruction. That's the big thing.
Okay. And one of our attendees is asking, would you name that book again, Lara?
The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle. And I can tell you the one sentence to quiet your mind. You can all do it when you're going to bed tonight if you're a ruminator like I was or can be, because it's very simple. You say to yourself or think to yourself, I wonder what my next thought will be. And when you do that, you get nothing. It shuts the mind down. I don't know why, it's magic, but I did that and it was a moment of peace. And then I just started a meditation practice and those moments became longer and longer. And when I got out of jail and was very alone and very scared in a whole different way, I use that meditation. I could meditate for longer and longer, and it helps. It helps more than anything, I think, because the only thing we can control is our mind, right? And that's also the only thing that can't be locked up. And so I had to work really hard to control my catastrophizing brain, which will still do that.
Isn't that one of the early books that started Oprah on her book club selections? I know that book was very impactful.
Yeah, I know she did a whole a whole series on
Yeah.
the New Earth book with him too. But yeah, that was very big. They were very tight, Oprah and Eckhart. So I was I prayed to both while I was in jail. Yeah.
Good one. Good one. So Laura, if you would tell us a little bit about, to me, this part was so harrowing. You finally get out of jail, you get your little boy back, and then, as you say, it shouldn't be this hard, but it was.
Yeah. I really when I was in jail, we would see, like I said, 80% of the women in jail are mothers. 100% of them love their children, desperately want to be with them, and don't want to be where they are and don't want to be doing what they've done. And I would see women get out and we'd have a party and they were full of good intentions. I'm going to get a job. I'm going to, is a range of things depending on who they were in the age. I'm going to break up with my drug dealer boyfriend, or I'm going to get a job, or I'm going to go back to school. I'm going to do the, I'm going to change everything. And then a week later, they would be rearrested and I'd see them back in jail. And I would think, how could you do that? That's so stupid. Like I didn't understand. Right.
Yeah.
And I thought, because I'm a rule follower, so I'm gonna do jail perfectly, and then I'll be I get out and I'll be done and I'll be on probation, but I'm gonna follow all the rules, and everything will be over. And I didn't know how hard it would be to not go back to jail for reasons that have nothing to do with ever committing a crime or doing a drug.
Mm.
And I also didn't know that there were times when I felt like I would be safer back in jail, and that had everything to do with illogical laws and consequences and barriers that are put up by the, depending on what county you're in, and the judgment and gossip of people. And I think it's a really like fundamental question. Like, do we believe in rehabilitation? Do we believe people can be more than the worst thing they've done or the worst version of themselves they've ever been? And then I would say it's a step further. Because we might believe in that intellectually, but do we believe in it when that person lives next door,
Yeah.
or when they're in our play group, or when our son wants to go to their house and play with their child, or in our community, or in our jobs? Will we rent to that person?
Yeah.
Will we hire that person? And so and that's just sort of the community barriers. And then there's just a lot of illogical consequences where, for me, I had to drug test for 3 different agencies in the same county with no notice. And if you don't have transportation or childcare and you miss any one of those, it's back to jail. And so every day for years and years, the way I describe it was, it's like walking on a high wire in high heels in the wind. You're just like, anything can topple you. Everything felt so precarious and a matter of survival. And that's with me doing that with all of the privilege that comes with being a middle-class white woman with
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
master's degree and some support. And it was almost impossible not to go back to jail for reasons that had nothing to do with doing anything wrong criminally or doing a drug again. And I think that is the thing that I've worked really hard to shed light on with the book.
Well, and I loved reading about the Gemma Project. So tell us more about what that was like and why that was such a turning point for you.
So so while I was incarcerated, I participated in this program that was called the Gemma Program. Now, my nonprofit's the Gemma Project.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes.
Yeah, but it's based on the original Gemma Program, which was created in Santa Cruz County Jail by women who said, let us tell you what we need for programming. Let us tell you what we need. Because, jails and prisons were built for men. And women are the fastest growing population. There's been a 750% increase. They are still only 10% of the larger population, but it is the fastest growing population, incarcerated population. And the reasons that women go to jail are very different than the reasons men go to jail. And like I said, 100% have trauma. And, for me doing that program, it was a community, and it was, school. I love school, but it was also volunteers from the community who are giving up their time and giving this message that you're worth it. Like, we see you, we care about you, you're not forgotten. And it's really hard to get people to care about incarcerated women. It really is. Like, it's nothing that I ever thought about in my book clubs and groups and baseball games. It's never crossed my mind. And but women respond to programming. They want it. They respond to it, and they again, they're all mothers. So I feel a big responsibility. So knowing that I would have a big microphone for a while when the book came out, I started with my co-founder, Cynthia Chase, who is a former mayor of Santa Cruz and has been involved in justice, in probation, in corrections, in juvenile justice, in lobbying for, 30 years. We started a nonprofit, and it's Gender and Trauma Responsive Services. So it's in custody programming and 18-month bridge for reentry, because that is when the hard work is, so that no one is going back to jail. No mother is going back to jail because she doesn't have a car ride to do a drug test, And so we started that, and it's been amazing. And we, I went to Chowchilla Prison, which is the biggest women's prison in the country, here in Chowchilla, California, and Oprah. And I did book club a couple months ago with the women there. And then I went back and did it again a few weeks ago, and I'm going back. And, it is interesting to have a book where the book club moms of the world demographic are seeing themselves in the book, and so are all of those incarcerated women are seeing themselves in the book. And I think, we're just trying to make, I'm just trying to help those women get home to their children, because that's all they want to do. 100%.
Well, and I think that must have been a real boost to your identity. And talk about that positive track, Laura. I can't imagine anything that'd be a more positive use than your time in jail.
Yeah.
Again, anybody who's listening, I don't want to make light, nor would Laura, of what she did or what she served time for, right? That's not what we're talking about.
No, I was guilty, and I should have done my time and paid for the laws I broke. I don't have zero debate with that, or with anyone doing that. But I do believe that we should let people pay for their crimes. Because if we don't let people pay for their crimes, then generations pay for those crimes. That's how, the number one predictor of women going back to jail is poverty. And I will say, my youngest son, Caden, he's just about to start his second year of college, but it was only last year, right at this time, might even been this date, a year ago, I moved him into his dorm at UC San Diego. And I felt like, yes, there's been 6 New York Times bestsellers, but that was the first time I felt proud of myself. I had a moment alone moving him into his dorm, and it was like after 15 years, I exhaled. So I was like, we did it. Because statistically, because he was in foster care, because he had incarcerated parents, he was more likely to go to prison than to UCSD with a 4.0 GPA, right? So it was like this moment where I was like, oh, I did it. Like, it felt like the end of the whole cycle of like re-entry for me. It wasn't the book, it was that moment as a mom. Sorry, I still get.
No, that's an amazing story and moment, Laura. I can totally feel what that must have felt like for you. Congratulations.
Thank you.
It's a big deal. I mean, like you, I'm a lifelong learner. I went to grad school in my 50s, and I took a course called Gender Inequality and the Law, and it opened my eyes. And until you see it, you don't know that what's happening.
Yeah.
Right.
Right. And, I think, my nonprofit's gender responsive, which means it's centered around the needs of women, and they're very different. And the impact of mothers being incarcerated for long, it goes to foster care, it goes to future generations, future imprisonment, mass incarceration. And so I think, making people care is the goal, and knowing that each one of those women has a story that could be a book.
Yeah.
There's context to it. There's context to everyone's story. And unfortunately, the justice system and the court system, there's not a lot of space and time for context, right? And so my hope is to end some stigma, and to get people to care, because, 1 out of every 3 Americans is somehow involved in the justice system. Either they've been under arrest, or they're under carceral control or probation. And if you have a group of, if you're in your group and you don't know who that is, it's because they're afraid to tell you, because it's one out of every three. So in any big room, I'm not the only one. And if you don't know who in your church groups or community groups or school groups is struggling, it's just because people are afraid. And it's like we said at the beginning, like nothing heals or changes in silence.
Yeah.
And sorry, I'm talking too much and probably
No. Oh, we're so fascinated. Laura, here's a question from one of our attendees. What can we do in our neighborhoods to help?
Well, I think it goes back to what I said earlier, is that everything heals in community, right? So I think, there's lots of ways to help if this is an issue you care about. And there's so many issues to care about in the world, and they seem overwhelming. And so it's a matter of like, do you have friendship to offer someone? Do you have listening to offer someone? Do you have money to donate? Do you have time to volunteer? Would you be willing to hire someone who's incarcerated, all skills being equal?
Mm-hmm.
Would you be willing? And I can give you, the 5 best reasons why a formerly incarcerated person might be your best employee. Or renting, safe housing is incredibly important to justice impacted people because, and jobs, and so I think, people who have rentals, consider taking those vouchers, right? It's guaranteed income. Like if you suspend judgment and let the person in with the voucher, the county subsidized voucher, because there's no reason not to. That's more guaranteed rent than you're going to get from someone in a rental application. But we have this judgment and this bias. And so just be aware when that's popping up. And, I'm not saying, go drive in front of the jail and pick up people when they get out. That's not safe. But, really the fundamental thing is let people know you're a safe person to talk to and listen. One of the reasons I told the stories in my book, and I didn't realize this at the time, is that I had never told any of them. I didn't tell them to my friends or my children and I didn't know how much I needed to tell them until after I had written it, because I was just in like survival and what do I have to do next? And I don't want anyone to find out. And I'm certainly, it's nothing I would bring up in conversation. And I was so afraid of people judging me. And I didn't realize how hard that was to carry and how much lighter I felt without carrying all of that shame. And that's really what it is, because it's hard to make friends. First of all, it's hard to make friends as a parent. And I remember, I was a couple years out of jail and Caden's in first grade. And one of the moms at school came up to me like you do at back to school night and said, oh, so-and-so loves Caden and they really want to get them together to play. Can I, bring so-and-so to your house? And I lived in a little tiny 400 square foot apartment, so I was a little embarrassed about that. But mostly I backed away because I didn't want to tell her my past, but I was like, well, if you knew, you probably wouldn't want your child to come here. So I didn't, it's so isolating. It keeps that distance. It's hard enough to make friends as an adult. And a lot of times it is your mom, the other parent friends. So that was really, really hard. And, part of it was my own shame and judgment of myself. I think people probably would have been more compassionate but I didn't give anyone the room to be that way. I just kept my distance. And that was hard.
That's a pretty big secret to carry around.
Mm-hmm.
So, Laura, we don't have too much time, but I want to hit on a couple more things that you've touched on. Regaining trust is a challenge for all of us, but we believe that one of the best things you can do with children is to admit it when you're wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Say that you're wrong. But so many parents act like it's a corporate, structure where you're at the top and you're not supposed to admit that you're wrong and the kids just have to deal. Tell me your perspective on that, because I think it's pretty different. And I do want to give you a couple minutes to talk about Doug Abrams and being outed by Brian Stevenson.
Trust, my oldest son, Dylan, whose house I'm in right now, who just got married, he had told me, and he's my most analytical thinker, and he said, forgiveness is automatic, Mom, and trust has to be earned. And that's true. And, how I how I think I built trust over time from the second, even while I was in jail, my boys would come and we would talk, they would come to visit. Um, I, I, I showed up every day, and I always did my words and my actions always matched.
Mm.
And I showed up day after day. And if I said I was going to be somewhere, I was there. And day after day after day, even now, if I'm going to be late somewhere, I get a little bit of a panic attack, even with my meditation, because it's just about showing up like day after day after day after day. And, Dylan went to college, right after I got out. He was starting at Cal Poly, and it was at the end of the school year. And he called me and he said, "Mom, I need to forward my mail to your house. You're the most trustworthy adult in my life. Dad keeps losing my mail." And I was, it's just mail forwarding. But that moment I was like, oh, it felt so good. And, kids just wanted to know their parents are okay. And I don't think power dynamics work, that structure you're doing of who's the leader and whose word goes no matter what. It doesn't work in the real world. It doesn't work with children, certainly not teenagers
Oh,
or
no.
toddlers. It doesn't work at any level. But I think I've always been someone who, long before this story began, and as a mom, like, who just always explained to my children the reasons why for everything.
That's really
That's
beautiful.
simple. And I still continue to do that. And I do it. They're adults, and I do that.
Well, and one of our people that's on with us just asked, do you feel accepted now? Or do you feel that you still need to conceal any of your past?
If you read my book, I have not concealed anything. And I do feel, I feel like it doesn't matter to me if I'm accepted or not accepted as much anymore. Right. I've told my story, and I think there's a lot of power in owning your story, especially for women, but for anyone. And I don't have this sort of need to make everyone like me, or think I'm good or not. People are gonna like me or not like me, or love me or not love me, or believe in me or not believe me, or trust me or not trust me. My job is to make sure I'm not that person who doesn't believe in me and trust me and love me. That's been my work. Or forgive me or judge me. That's my work. And it's just it's so exhausting to carry the expectations of other people. It's exhausting. And I'm too old to do that anymore. Like I am. I'm just like, here's who I am. And it's so much easier to navigate life if you're not pretending to be someone you're not. I spent so much of my life pretending to be someone I'm not. And it's a really rough way to go through life.
It's a lot less scary too, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, literally, those of you who know Brian Stevenson's work, the story that you tell about being with Doug Abrams, and here you have this job that matters so much to you, and your employer had not Googled you, and then he does and says, "Come back tomorrow, we'll talk," right?
Yeah. It was
Who
so hard
knew
to
that
go.
being a former addict would be such a requirement for the job? Turned out you were the perfect person.
Yeah, I mean, the first book I worked on was the Book of Forgiving by Archbishop Desmond Tutu as a writer with him,
Right.
and I didn't know how to forgive myself, but looking back, I can see how every book I got to work on and every author I got to work with was sort of rewiring my brain, and like, and it's always easy to rear view mirror your life and your experiences, be like, this led to this, led to this. But Brian was the first author that I sort of unveiled my secret to, over eggs in Alabama. And I was terrified, and I, told the story and started crying. And he was like, "Great, you'll be perfect to work on this book with Anthony Ray Hinton." Like that was the response. So nothing has ever been as bad as it's been in my head, ever.
The story is amazing, though, Laura.
Yeah,
Desmond Tutu, the Dalai Lama, Brian Stevenson. If you could make this up, people wouldn't believe it, right?
I know. I
It
know.
is really amazing. So here's what I want to end with, because I think this is, such a story. Your organization now, your agency, True Literary, is a reflection of your journey. You describe it as using your power to shine a light on other people. We know that our stories are important and can make connections and meaning. What would you say now gives you hope, and why?
Mm. Sorry, one of my dogs is barking. I hope you guys, it's not too
No, we
loud.
can't hear them.
Oh, good. Okay. Um, what gives me hope now? what gives me hope now is, I was just in Flint, Michigan, and I was at this graduation in the jail there. And there were so many community members and faith leaders there and celebrities, and the governor of Michigan was there. And the sheriff there introduced the graduates of this program, like the Gemma program, but it's happening there. It's called Ignite. And he introduced people as returning citizens, not formally incarcerated.
Returning
There's a
citizen.
returning citizen. And I loved that. And it gave me hope. But what gave me hope was all of those people there. And it's an mass incarceration, the justice system, systemic racism is all an overwhelming problem. But just like the individual people who are doing their bit of good where they can, I love that. That gives me hope. Like the parent venture, doing your bit of good in your lane as educators and helping parents and intervening and supporting, like that gives me hope. Like, and it sounds very naive, but I'm naive. Like hope is a radical, radical thing. It is a rebellious thing to do. And going into the prisons and the jails and talking to the women there gives me hope, and it gives me hope for them because there's so much creativity and potential and brilliance and trauma and struggles in those in the jails and prisons in this country. And I just think we need to do better caring for people. But people caring for people, that gives me hope. I love that.
Well, Laura, you've inspired us all. You've given me hope again. Thank you for those kind words, and thank you for your brilliance in this wonderful book. People, you have to read it. I love memoirs, but I could not put this book down. I wrote a note to Laura's assistant, and she wrote me back that day, and I was like, oh my God. So thank you. It has been an honor and a privilege talking to you today. And don't you love all these hearts? It's so fun. Everybody do pick up this book, Lara Love Hardin. Thank you for this amazing journey and sharing it. And your hopes are wonderful. And so we just want you to keep going and doing the good work that you're doing.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Okay. Take care, everybody. We hope to see you again soon. Good night for now. Thank you, Laura.
Thank you. Bye.